We are one day away from the official start of the 2024 season. How excited are you? We're fired up here on Fantasy Football Today, brought to you by BetMGM. I'm Jamey Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. Joining us as always, as he will every Wednesday, is former NFL running back, superstar Robert Turbin. We're going to have a lot of fun today on the show. Going to break down the game for tomorrow night. We're going to talk about some of our teams on the last draft that we had. Yes, you can still do your drafts up until kickoff tomorrow. We're going to do a little running back roundtable, do some start, bench, or cut, and answer your tweets. Please send them to us on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. Use the hashtag AskFFT and we'll answer some of your questions, some draft questions, obviously some start, sit questions as well. But guys, let's get right into it. We got the game tomorrow night. We got the Ravens and the Chiefs. I know you're fired up to see the Super Bowl champions defend their ring, their honor, their trophy for the second time in their building. Last year didn't go as well as they lost to the Detroit Lions, but we'll see how things go against Baltimore. So let's start with the Ravens, Heath. They got a brand new addition in Derrick Henry. I know we've been a little bit concerned about how Henry will do, but we know what happened in the playoffs in the AFC Championship game. They did not run the ball. We're going to see a lot of Derrick Henry in tomorrow night's game.
I think that would be the plan. Listen, Derrick Henry, last year, the whole story was when the Titans were ahead, Derrick Henry was awesome, won you games, could have been a league winner. The Titans weren't ahead very often. When the Titans were behind, Derrick Henry was more of a flex or a low-end RB2, finished as RB17 on the season. Ravens are 3-point underdogs in this game, but it's September. I think the Ravens probably have a little bit more motivation in this game than the Chiefs do. I wouldn't be surprised if we see 18 touches for Henry. He's a start.
Robert, when you look at this move, I know you've talked about this a lot in our shows, that going from where he was the focal point in Tennessee to where he's not the focal point in Baltimore, how much will that help him? How much will they sort of lean into the storyline of you didn't run the ball enough in that loss against the Chiefs the last time, let's correct that mistake, and just the expectations for Derrick Henry, not just tomorrow night, but also for the season?
Yeah, I think it helps him playing with Lamar Jackson because, Lamar is going to utilize his feet as well. And so now the shoulders of the offense is on who? Lamar Jackson, what he's able to do within this offense. And Derrick Henry becomes more of a complementary piece to that offense, which I think helps him. He's been the vocal point in Tennessee. We know that. You just said that. He's gotten a lot of carries, but I don't think his carries are going to, subtract a whole lot this season. It will some, but not a whole lot. They're going to lean on Derrick Henry, I think, pretty heavily within this offense, but make no mistake, it's still going to be about Lamar Jackson.
Robert, do you expect more in the passing game for Henry? Because Todd Monken's not Greg Roman. We saw them throw the ball a little bit more last year, not to the same extent that we were hoping, but still, can Derrick Henry be a little bit more of a factor in the pass game? So far, his career high is 33 receptions. Do we see that maybe going over or under this season?
I say under. His impact is going to be running the football, converting on short yardages, getting in the end zone and goal line situations, especially in the red zone and things of that nature. That's where I think he'll make his most impact. I think maybe Justice Hill and some of those other guys will be more complimentary as it pertains to the passing game. But I think Derrick Henry will still be involved in some third down packages, especially because of his ability to pass protect. I know that doesn't help fantasy, okay, but it does help you win football games as an offense. So he'll still get some catches, but it'll be the other guys, I think, get the majority of those passes out of the backfield.
Yeah, we never liked it when you were back there blocking for your quarterbacks. We liked it when you were running the ball. So hopefully we get that from Derrick Henry as well. Heath, Zay Flowers, big topic of conversation this offseason because when we started doing our drafts, his average draft position was a little bit too high. But it's come down to, I think, a point where if you're drafting tonight, round 5, okay, round 6 is probably a good spot for him, especially in a heavy wide receiver league. We know, again, this is going to open things up. Derrick Henry is going to allow a lot of, maybe one-on-one coverage, a lot of, easy matchups for him. But in tonight's game, they lost Snead. No more top cornerback for the Chiefs. How do we see Zay Flowers in tonight's matchup?
I think he's going to need a big play. And he had some of those against the Chiefs last year. If he has a big play, if he gets down the field and has a 40 or 50-yard catch, if he gets into the end zone, he's going to have a good fantasy day. I don't see a situation where he gets 8, 9, 10 targets and racks up 6 catches for 70 yards and has a good fantasy day that way. That makes him just like the quintessential wide receiver 3. If you're in a 3 wide receiver league, or if you start 2 in a flex in a full PPR league, you're probably starting Zay Flowers, but you probably wish you had 2 better players also.
So we'll see how Flowers does. Obviously, Mark Andrews is going to be a big part of this passing game. Ravens going to, show off some of their, new schemes and new situations with Derrick Henry back there. I want to go to the other side of the ball in the backfield for Kansas City, Robert, because they added somebody in the last 10 days in Samaje Perine, who was cut by the Broncos. And we know that role Jerick McKinnon had was very viable for fantasy managers, certainly a big part of the Chiefs offense. They didn't necessarily use him last year to the same extent. Isaiah Pacheco did a lot of good things on third down. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out for the first 4 games dealing with his illness. They have Carson Steele, an undrafted rookie free agent. So Pacheco's the lead guy. I don't think anybody's questioning that. But how do you see the guys behind him working in, and will Perine sort of take some of those third down opportunities that McKinnon used to have?
Yes, Samaje Perine, a very sneaky signing for the Kansas City Chiefs, and could be a very sneaky signing for fantasy managers out there as well, particularly because of, like you mentioned, his impact on third down. I think this is the reason why Kansas City brought him in. Although Isaiah Pacheco is the bell cow and is the lead back for Kansas City, Kansas City to be able to play other backs, particularly on third down, to be able to save the legs of Isaiah Pacheco and those other backs making positive impacts. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like you mentioned, and Jerick McKinnon. I think Samaje Perine will play that role very well for Kansas City. And if you have him, if you draft Samaje Perine in the late round, maybe like 10, 11, or 12, you want to have him off the bench, I think it's a good pickup for fantasy managers.
Like Isaiah Pacheco managers don't want to hear this, but Samaje Perine was awesome last year when they used him in the passing game. Caught 50 of 56 targets, had a catch rate of 89.3%, and averaged 8.1 yards per target. Like he was really,
and that's in Denver.
He was so good in that role.
Right.
If you remember a year and a half ago, the Bengals decided in the playoffs, you know what, we need Samaje Perine on the field, not Joe Mixon. So I do think that there's a little bit of risk here to Pacheco. I'm not sure week 1, when he's been there for about 5 minutes, if we're going to see that quite as much. But as the season goes on, that we were really hoping Pacheco would take the next step and be a top 10 fantasy running back. Perine could stand in the way of that.
So you're drafting tonight. Isaiah Pacheco is a round 2 or round 3 pick for you?
I'd prefer him in round 3.
But would you take him in round 2?
I would not.
Okay, so
I'd move Josh Jacobs ahead of him, for instance.
I agree.
I moved Jacobs ahead of him as well. I still would take him in round 2 if I want to get him, just to guarantee the still starting running back for the Chiefs. I know we're saying he may lose some work, but that's still a pretty good place to be as the starting running back for that backfield. We got the situation also in the passing game for the Chiefs. So we know that Marquise Brown is ruled out. He's not going to play in week 1. They're hopeful to get him back in week 2 dealing with that shoulder injury. Robert, when you look at the pass catchers there for Kansas City, Rashee Rice not going to be suspended at least anytime soon. So he should be the number 1 guy. They have Xavier Worthy, who's the rookie and, got a lot of good publicity this offseason in training camp and hopefully takes advantage of no Marquise Brown being there. When you see those 2 guys, how do you think Mahomes is going to lean on both those guys? Is Rice an automatic start for you? And then do you think Worthy could just make some splash plays or be a little bit more consistent wide receiver going into even tomorrow night's game against Baltimore?
I don't really think either wide receiver is a consistent starter for me at this particular stage. And the reason being is, you got to take into account some of the offseason things that happened with Rashee Rice. You got to question how ready is he to go to start the season. I think that would sort of deter me from wanting to start Rashee Rice. I know the numbers are there, especially because of what he did the second half of last season, but I would be concerned a little bit about how he starts this year. So I'd love to have Rashee Rice, but he'd be more of a guy coming off the bench for me, maybe wide receiver 3 or 4, and I feel the same way about Xavier Worthy. I think they're neck and neck right now as far as that wide receiving core in Kansas City.
So I agree with Robert completely on Xavier Worthy. Like if you have 3 wide receivers in a flex and you want a home run hitter in your flex spot, Xavier Worthy's the guy to get there. He could make your day in one play. I think it's going to be so interesting to see how Baltimore defends this Kansas City pass attack, how much respect they show Worthy over the top, how much they open up things underneath, and then more importantly, what's the split between Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice? Because you can say either Kelce was being saved for the playoffs last year or Kelce wasn't 100% in the second half last year, but it's undeniable that in the second half last year, when the Chiefs threw the ball underneath to Rashee Rice, better things happened than when they threw it underneath to Travis Kelce. If Rice Rice needs to beat Kelsey out, be in that 25% range as opposed to a 20% target range. I think he's going to do it. He's a top 15 wide receiver for me this week.
And we'll show you just how much Heath likes Rashee Rice when we review our teams later on in the show. A couple news items for you. Bengals coach Zack Taylor is speaking right now. When asked about Jamar Chase, will he practice today? He said, quote, "We'll see." We'll have that story for you if it comes up throughout the course of our show. A lot of people still drafting their fantasy leagues tonight. They want to know if Jamar Chase will be playing in week 1. Obviously, we'll be on the field for the Bengals anytime soon. And then Kyle Pitts dealing with a hamstring injury. Robert, I don't know how many hamstring injuries you dealt with throughout the course of your career, but limited in practice. We don't know exactly what his status will be taking on the Steelers this week. What do you think about Kyle Pitts' outlook for this week and then for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I'd stay away from Kyle Pitts this week. I wouldn't start him this week, particularly because of the hamstring injury. You just don't know what you're going to get out of him. Even if he does play, how well will he play? What's the chemistry like between him and Kirk Cousins? Kirk Cousins may want to veer elsewhere with the football in that matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'd steer away from him this week.
And I was a little bit concerned in this matchup specifically for Drake London, but I'm probably going to boost Drake London's target share up just a little bit. I think Darnell Mooney becomes an even better sleeper option, especially if Pitts misses, because Mooney can be that deep guy if all the attention's on London. London will be back inside of my top 15, 20 wide receivers.
Some tight ends you can look at to replace Pitts if, in fact, he does miss. Juwan Johnson, Zach Ertz, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki. Fant and Gesicki have revenge games this week, so we always love that narrative as well. But you can check out our waiver wire column on CBSSports.com and your streaming tight ends as well as options to replace in case Pitts does miss. Let's take a quick question from Twitter here as we're going to answer them throughout the course of the show. Should I start Zamir White, Chase Brown, or Deontay Johnson in half PPR? Heath, I'll just go to you on this one. Zamir White, Chase Brown, Deontay Johnson, half PPR.
It's between Zamir White and Deontay Johnson for me, and the half PPR is what makes the difference. Again, another situation, really interested to learn how much of a role does Alexander Mattison have, but I have Zamir White as a top 24 running back this week.
All right, let's see if those big guns can take advantage of that Chargers defense with Zamir White carrying the ball. We expect him to be the lead running back for the Raiders, hopefully all season long. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back and take a look at our last draft that we did. This happened on Tuesday. Robert's first draft with us. Heath and I are in the draft as well. We'll show you our teams next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So we held our Fantasy Football Today draft on Tuesday. It's the final 12-team PPR draft that we use on the site. You can check out the results on CBSSports.com. And it was the first draft that we've done with our good friend Robert Turbin now. So I was curious to see how Robert was going to draft. Robert picked right in front of me at the 10 spot. Heath had the number 1 overall pick, and I was at pick 11. So we're going to show you our teams, going to go through a little bit of what our strategy was. Again, some of you guys are drafting tonight, but also just, some things that can maybe help you in planning for week 1. So here's what Heath did with the number 1 overall pick. Obviously surprised us all by taking a kicker. No, he took Christian McCaffrey first overall. So you like Rashee Rice a lot. We're going to talk about that in a second. But you see Jerome Ford as your number 2 running back. And for those of you that can't see the fine print at the bottom there, this is his bench. Jaylen Warren, Ty Chandler, Zach Charbonnet, Ray Davis, and then 2 receivers in Greg Dortch and DeMario Douglas. Clearly, running back was a priority for you to fill that second spot. So you got Jerome Ford in the starting lineup for this week. Maybe Warren, if he's healthy, he might pivot toward that with his matchup against Atlanta. But Chandler's got some upside, clearly playing alongside Aaron Jones, who's going to be 30 this year. Charbonnet's got some upside in that Seattle backfield. Is that the one spot that you say I'm a little concerned about based on how you built this roster?
I mean, a little bit, but not really for week 1. This was one of the biggest risers, Jerome Ford, when I transitioned from season-long rankings to week 1 rankings, because I'm not worried about Nick Chubb coming back in the middle of week 1 like I am in the middle of the season. I project Jerome Ford as a very solid RB2 until Nick Chubb comes back. And Nick Chubb didn't just have a normal ACL tear. He has all kinds of problems in that need to come back from. It might be week 6, week 7, week 8 before I need an RB2. And I did try to draft some upside backup running backs like Zach Charbonnet, like Ray Davis. What the hope is by the time Chubb comes back, if he comes back and is himself again, I've got another one of those running backs who have taken over as the starter to fill that RB2 spot.
And then we talked about this earlier. Robert, not so high on Rashee Rice for this week and, wanting to see how this is all going to unfold without Marquise Brown there. But you took him at the 2-3 turn. Yep. I had a feeling, just knowing how much you like Rice, that would be the spot because I don't think he was going to make it back to you. But does he justify going that soon? I mean, our projections, the 25th wide receiver for the season. We've moved him up and up and up. I know you've moved him up more than anybody else. You really like him that much that is it just because you're picking on the end you took him there, or was that really the spot you had him targeted?
That was part of it. And another thing you have to remember is like we do 25 fantasy football drafts throughout the year, and we get to this very last draft of the season for me. I was like, hey, I'm going to go get my guys. I want to make sure I've got enough Rashee Rice. You see 106 targets on the projections here. His last 9 games, he was on pace for 112 catches, not targets. I think Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown are going to make things easier on him. I don't think Travis Kelce at 35 is going to have a bounce-back campaign from last year. I think he's their number 1 target underneath and is going to be one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football.
So, Robert, obviously you're not as high on Rice, and I'm sure when you saw that pick, you were like, oh, okay, well, now I don't have to worry about it, and let Heath go ahead and reach it. That's what he's going to do. So if you want to throw up Heath's team again so we can see it, and Robert's going to grade Heath's roster here again, starting with McCaffrey, going with the wide receivers at the turn, with the quarterback and wide receiver turn, the 2 Chiefs, Rice and Patrick Mahomes. So Robert, you could be generous, you can be kind, or you could be a strict teacher and give him maybe a harsh grade. But I like this roster. Let's see what you say.
I like the roster as well. I give him a B+. And the only reason why it's not an A is because of the bench and what you said about your bench. You mentioned hopefully one of these guys later on in the season will, end up being in my starting lineup. And for me, when I draft, hope doesn't do it for me. Okay. I need guys in my roster that I know are going to be on the roster, that I know are going to be on the field getting playing time. That's sort of my strategy. A lot of the guys that you have may be seeing the bench most of the season. There's more weeks than just week 1. That's why I give it a B+. But my favorite pick, though, is Kittle right there. I think Kittle's going to have a better season this year than last season.
All right, so he likes George Kittle, doesn't like your bench, and he likes certainty on his bench. And when we show you Robert's bench, he definitely likes security, social security, because all those guys on his bench are old. So let's show you Robert's team and what he did from the 10th spot, starting with Saquon Barkley with his first overall pick. He's a little sneaky, Robert. You know what you do is you take your best player, you put in the flex, and when somebody else looks at who they're playing, they're like, oh, okay, there's where that guy is. So he moved him down to his flex spot and put Barkley down there. But you see here, got a great quarterback in Lamar Jackson, Ramondre Stevenson, Alvin Kamara. No surprise, the running back has good running backs. The receivers we'll talk about in a little bit, but there's that bench. 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, 32-year-old Keenan Allen, 31-year-old Brandon Cooks. You got some aged and some veterans on your bench, Robert. So let's start with the beginning here. So you had the 10th spot. It's PPR, 3 receivers. Was Barkley your guy all the way? Because on our previous shows, you've talked about how much you like him. He was your number 2 running back based on the rankings you showed us at the first time you were on the air with us.
I mean, I do love Barkley. I really do. I really think he's going to have an exceptional year in fantasy this season. But, I mean, we talked about this during the commercial. I was in a meeting. You took Garrett Wilson right after I took Barkley. I was disappointed because I would have taken Wilson had I recognized he was still on the board. Nonetheless, I think he would have been the next. I think you would have picked Barkley if I picked Wilson. So, he would have been the next best available player at that time, 10th or 11th in the first round overall. I think he's in line to have a great year this season. Obviously, a down year last season, but in a better situation with the Eagles where he doesn't have to be the vocal point, but has the skill set to make a lot of plays, both running the football and catching it. I like Saquon right there at 10 overall.
I couldn't hit draft fast enough as soon as I saw Garrett Wilson on the board. So I appreciated you letting him fall one more spot. So let's talk about that bench that you have there. Again, you got, and even one of your starters, Alvin Kamara, almost 30 years old as well, 29 years old, or going to be 29 years old this year. Rodgers, Brandon Cooks, Keenan Allen. You like security. So how confident are you in these guys that they can still be significant contributors despite the fact that they're getting a little bit older?
Well, they may not be significant contributors, but when you think about Keenan Allen and when you think about Brandon Cooks, I'll start with Cooks. Cooks has been in training camp all the whole time. And you've heard reports about his rapport that he's creating with Dak Prescott and the chemistry that they've been developing with one another. Didn't have great chemistry last season. Felt like they came on towards the end of the year. I think they'll have a strong start together because they've been together the entire offseason. So if I need to substitute a guy in at wide receiver, I feel comfortable with Brandon Cooks knowing that he's at least going to get some targets. And I feel the exact same way about Keenan Allen. Yes, he's 32, but he's not the number one receiver. When he gets into the game, though, he's going to get his shots and his targets and his opportunities because he's still premier.
I looked at Robert's bench, and the first thing that came to mind is that commercial where Dan Marino's throwing to Randy Moss and Jerry Rice, and Emmitt Smith is still back there. Just a bunch of old guys. We'll see how they hold up. But listen, Robert's got, he's got conviction on the guys that he likes, and, he likes those older players, a little bit more security than hope in terms of comparing your bench. So now you, Heath, get to grade Robert's team. What do you think about that roster?
Yeah, I think it was a B+. It's exactly what Robert should get for that because, if he didn't have the guys on Social Security, I'm just a little bit jealous that he's still young enough to have the ability to draft somebody that's older than him. Nobody older than us is playing in the NFL. So, yeah, B+.
All right, so B+ for both of you. Let's see what you guys think about my roster. Again, picking right after Robert. I had the 11th pick again. Quickly picking Garrett Wilson as soon as he slid to that spot. And this was a different draft for me, but I was telling the guys during the break, when you draft with people that you tend to have to go a little bit different direction if you want to stand out. So this was very running back heavy for me. So after taking Wilson in the first round, Jonathan Taylor in round 2, my next 2 picks were Kenneth Walker and Rachaad White. So 3 basically top 12 running backs or top 15 running backs, and we know that those are valuable commodities if they hit and stay healthy. That was kind of my approach, a little bit different than I normally do. But you see the bench there again. I'll read it for you in case you can't see it. Marquise Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Cortland Sutton, A.D. Mitchell, Bucky Irving, Kamani Vidal, and very heavy receiver bench just because, again, I passed up on a lot of wide receivers, taking Stephon Diggs and Chris Godwin as my second and third wide receivers. So let's start with the receiving core. Heath, I'll come to you because we like to have secure receiving cores in 3 receiver leagues in PPR. Do you like this receiving core, knowing that it's deep? There's 6 guys essentially that I'll say 5 guys for 2 spots, with taking Garrett Wilson, putting him on a different level. Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, I know you like a lot. Marquise Brown when he's healthy. All these guys can still be borderline number 2 receivers, but there's not the upside of what a top 20 draft pick would be.
I was just sitting here thinking about how bad that receiving core would be if Robert hadn't given you Garrett Wilson.
You'd
really be in trouble.
It would have been a different draft. It would have been a different draft.
No, I don't think you have a number 2 wide receiver, and you might have 6 number 3 wide receivers. But I like the guys you picked on the bench, maybe more than I like the guys you picked in the not straight up, but at cost versus a Stephon Diggs or a Chris Godwin. Now, that being said, if Mike Evans takes a step back at 31 years old, Godwin could be a number 2 wide receiver. If Tank Dell or Nico Collins cede targets to Stephon Diggs, then he could be a number 2 wide receiver. And I think the sneaky guy, I know that Robert doesn't like hope, but in the second half of the season, Brian Thomas Jr., I think, could emerge, I hope, as a number 2 wide receiver.
He absolutely could, and maybe it was just drafting next to Robert. The running back rubbed off on me a little bit, but Robert, when you see those 3 running backs, Jonathan Taylor, Ken Walker, Rachaad White, you got to like that trio.
Yeah, I love it. I love your draft. I give you an A, and I have to disagree with Heath slightly. I know we're talking about running backs here, but I think Brian Thomas Jr., especially when you look at how he performed in the preseason, could emerge as a top 25 top wide receiver, a number 2 wide receiver for your team, because he's going to end up being sort of the number 1 guy as far as on the outside for the Jaguars. He'll get a lot of targets, but I love these trio of running backs. I believe in depth when building your fantasy rosters, and so whether it's a bye week or one of these guys go down, or maybe you want all 3 of these guys in the lineup at one time, you've got security in your backfield.
And I did handcuff Rachaad White with Bucky Irving just to get at least both those guys in case I need him. But we'll see about the depth from the running back position, because Kamani Vidal really the only other guy I have, but these 3 guys should stay in my lineup as long as they're healthy. And then just one note, you saw T.J. Hawkinson as my only tight end. I did that on purpose. I'm going to make an ad drop. We have IR spots in this league, so Hawkinson will go to the IR spot. I'll probably pick up Jawan Johnson unless somebody else beats me to it. He's one of my favorite sleeper tight ends this year, and I think he'll do okay in that week 1 matchup against the Carolina Panthers. All right, so Robert gave me an A. Heath, what are you going to give me from a grade perspective?
I think it's a B+, because the running backs are definitely an A. The wide receivers push it down to a B+. 3 B+ across the board.
3 B+ across the board, although Robert gives me an A, so I'm going to give myself an A- because of the higher grade. So I win, but we'll see what happens. What matters more is how we win throughout the course of the season. All right, let's take one more question here from you guys on Twitter. Again, send them to us using the hashtag AskFFT. Start Rashee Rice or T. Higgins. So Robert, I'm going to put you to the test. Half PPR.
Higgins.
Do you like Rice or Higgins? All right, so does it matter, though, if Jamar Chase is playing?
Nope, it doesn't matter. Jamar Chase has been at the house. He's been at the facility, but not on the field. I think that matters. This is the NFL. I know he's great, but it's tough to just get on the field week one when you haven't done anything, all right, and tell me you're going to go out there for 12 catches and 100-plus yards. I like Higgins.
All right, so he likes Higgins. You would take Rice.
I'll go with Rice.
We'll see how these two guys perform. I would like both. I think both guys are going to be fantastic in week number one. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back and do a little running back roundtable. Robert's going to give us his take on some of these ambiguous backfields. Who's better in Miami? Who's better in Pittsburgh? Who's better in Tennessee? We'll get the expert's opinion next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So we got a running back here on the show. We might as well take advantage of his knowledge. You're going to hear us talk about a lot of running backs throughout the course of the season. And a lot of you have some questions, not just about week one, still doing your drafts, about some of these ambiguous backfields like we've talked about throughout the course of this draft process. So let's start with Miami. And we know that both these guys had the chance to be successful. Both were very good last year in terms of Achane and Raheem Mostert. So even though Mostert, most touchdowns, tied Christian McCaffrey for most touchdowns in the season in 2023, most rushing touchdowns last year with 18. Achane still getting drafted in some cases 3 or 4 and maybe 5 rounds ahead of Mostert. So, Robert, when you look at these guys, Achane's got so much upside. Mostert, the older veteran, but still plenty of upside. You got Jaylen Wright, the rookie, kind of waiting in the wings, but these two guys are the more prominent Dolphins running backs. How do you break down Miami going into the season and maybe even week one as they take on Jacksonville?
Yeah, this one is a really tough one because you could easily see Achane at some point taking over for Raheem Mostert and maybe getting more opportunities within that Miami offense. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Raheem Mostert, the fact that Achane is being drafted over him, I personally wouldn't do that. I think Raheem Mostert is still going to be a viable factor for fantasy managers in fantasy this season. It's a tough one, but I'd lean towards Raheem Mostert in this situation.
I would assume it's the only backfield we're going to talk about today where you could just start both of them in week one. I've got them both ranked as number 2 running backs. I do have Achane ahead of Mostert, but the touch split and really the touchdowns, what we saw last year from Miami, I don't know that we can expect the same type of thing in terms of pass touchdowns versus rush touchdowns because they had several blowout victories, including that Broncos game where I think they scored 6 rushing touchdowns. So those touchdowns that Mostert was counting on might dry up a little bit this year. 51
PPR points for Achane in that game against Denver. We'd love to see that a little bit more consistently, but obviously unrealistic for anybody to do on a week-to-week basis. Let's go to Pittsburgh, and I think when we started this process before the Jaylen Warren injury, we were talking about these guys being very close. But Robert, now we got Warren expected to play in week one against the Falcons, but Najee Harris had a strong training camp. He lost some weight. We know he also lost his 5th-year option, so playing for a contract, how do you view Najee, Warren? Who do you like better? How do you think it'll play out this year?
Yeah, this is another tough situation, but I got to lean on Najee Harris again with this football team. Jaylen Warren is going to get his opportunities and he can make some plays, out of the backfield. But again, are you going to be able to repeat that same success, the same thing that you talked about with Achane in another year with the Pittsburgh Steelers? At least we know from Najee Harris what we're going to get, and potentially he could be even better this season. He's shown the consistency. You know what you're going to get from Najee Harris. I'd play it safe and lean towards Najee in this situation.
Yeah, listen, this is one of those teams that everybody kind of went backwards for me because you look at the week 1 lines and they are 3-point underdogs at Atlanta with a 19.5-point implied total. I think Najee Harris is going to be better when the Steelers win. Jaylen Warren's going to be better when the Steelers are playing from behind. I think Najee probably scores more touchdowns. I'm not sure how many touchdowns the Steelers are going to score in this game. I will lean slightly towards Jaylen Warren, but I said with the first 2 guys, you can start them both as number 2 running backs. These guys are both number 3 running backs. I hope they're not better than your flex.
I do think for this week, at least for me, I give Najee a slight edge because I don't know how much Warren will play. He's talking about playing. Obviously, it'd be great to see him out there. But this feels like week 1 is going to be a lot of the Najee Harris show, especially Russell Wilson's coming off the calf injury. But again, can they run on the Falcons with that offensive line being what it is? That's what fantasy managers will have to decide. Let's go to Tennessee, where we have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. And Robert, I go back to the owners' meetings. I spoke to Brian Callahan there. He said, we're going to see both running backs. Every offensive coach for Tennessee said, we're going to see both running backs. In the preseason, we saw both running backs. Do you have a slight edge on Pollard versus Spears? And again, how will this play out throughout the course of the season?
I think it's Tony Pollard. That's who I'm leaning towards in this one. And this was not even as close as the other two that we just talked about. I think Tony Pollard, when you look at the preseason, I think he outperformed Tyjae Spears in a lot of respects. I think Tyjae Spears just has a lot of room to grow. But Tony Pollard is going to be the guy making most of the plays, in my opinion, for the Tennessee Titans in the backfield.
100% agree with Robert here. Tony Pollard's a top 20 running back for me. Tyjae Spears is kind of a boom-bust flex on a week-to-week basis. I think the advantage, it's so funny that we now view Pollard as the plodder, like the Zeke from 2 years ago, and Tyjae Spears is supposed to be the young, exciting running back. Tony Pollard looked pretty young and pretty exciting in the preseason, and he has a better ability to handle the bigger workload than Spears does. So I'll go Pollard as a number 2, Spears as a flex.
This is one that I'm fascinated to watch in week 1. Tough matchup against Chicago, but we saw both these guys get goal line opportunities in the preseason. But who's going to be the one on passing downs? Because they both can do it, and obviously the Titans used Spears in that role last year, but it was a different coaching staff. So we'll see what this new regime does and how they use both these guys. Going to be very curious to see how that unfolds. Same thing with the situation in Cincinnati, Robert. So we just had the Bengals offense coordinator. I keep refreshing, by the way, everything Bengals to see if there's a Jamar Chase update. So I was looking at in the break, glowing reviews for Zack Moss, glowing reviews for Chase Brown. Brown's going to play on kickoff returns. Moss was the guy that was great in Indianapolis last year. This one's tough because everybody sort of got excited about Brown, but Moss is the guy that they brought in to potentially replace Joe Mixon. What's the breakdown for you?
It's Zack Moss all the way for me in this one. He was named the starter by the Bengals. He showed you what he could do in the starting role with the Indianapolis Colts last season. I think he's in somewhat of a similar offense. You know, he's playing with Joe Burrow and some great receivers, so I think that opens up some things for him, especially in the passing game. He has a great skill set to catch the ball out of the backfield, and when you've got 2 great receivers and a good tight end, you tend to forget about the running backs and their skill sets out of the backfield. Zack Moss has shown it and proven it. Chase Brown has not yet. I'm going with Zack Moss.
I'll go with I guess what Robert said, because to me it's just completely a coin flip. I have no idea. I'm not sure this is even going to be a team that's good at running the football, but you would think in this week they're probably up 2 scores in the second quarter. There ought to be plenty of opportunities to run the football. They're both flexes for me this week.
I would lean toward, I agree with that. I lean toward Moss in the early part of the season, but he's had a hard time staying healthy. At Utah, he struggled with injuries. In Buffalo, he struggled with injuries. Last year, he sort of avoided the injury bug as the backup to Jonathan Taylor. So will he stay healthy over the course of the year? I just like reserving Brown on my team just because if he does get that job, I think there's a little bit more explosiveness for him by comparison to Zack Moss. All right, the last backfield that we'll talk about here with our running back roundtable is the Washington Commanders. It seems as if the push has been to draft Brian Robinson Jr. first. He's my preferred Commanders running back, but Austin Ekeler is the veteran, the proven guy. Robert, how do you see these two guys working together this year?
This is a very, very interesting one for me. This is the most intriguing one out of all of the backfields that we've talked about in this segment, because I think there's a space where, you know, I don't know if you'll see the same Austin Ekeler from the Chargers, but you could see a resurgence, you know, in his productivity in fantasy. I think Brian Robinson Jr., you know, he's going to be there. He's going to get those carries on first and second down. But Austin Ekeler, I think, will play heavily on third down. He'll be huge in those 2-minute situations. And I think that can open up some opportunities for some huge plays and some huge production from Austin Ekeler this season. I wouldn't be surprised if the share load sort of started splitting 50-50 as the season progressed. I like Austin Ekeler here.
Another one where I really don't think we have any reason to have a good idea. It's probably, like I said earlier, Brian Robinson's better in wins, Austin Ekeler's better in losses. How many games are the Commanders going to win? I do worry a little bit with Austin Ekeler that I'm not sure as a rusher, especially between the tackles, he can hang with Brian Robinson anymore. He's so much better in the passing game, though. But what's Jaden Daniels going to do when he gets in trouble in the pocket? Is he going to dump the ball off to Austin Ekeler, or is he going to take off and run? I think he might take off and run more. I'm going to lean towards Robinson, but it feels kind of gross to me. I
like Robinson for 2 reasons, and I think Eckler's become a good value based on how the draft's unfolded. But the reason I like Robinson is Eckler's 29. He had a bad ankle injury last year that sort of limited him, but is he still going to be able to hold up over the course of the year? I like that they're going to limit his touches, use him in the passing game. He said he's going to go back to what he was when he was sharing with Melvin Gordon, so I think that's a good thing to sort of maximize what he's best at. But if something happens to Ekeler, we saw it last year when Gibson missed time for Washington, Brian Robinson's numbers in the passing game spiked, and I think that's the upside that he brings. If Ekeler misses time, Robinson could be a potential superstar. Let's answer one question here on X, Twitter, again, whatever we call it, Twix. Godwin or Watson. So Heath, you're up. Who do you like better, Chris Godwin or Christian Watson in the flex?
I will go Chris Godwin. I definitely think he has a better floor. If you just wanted to shoot for the upside, I guess Christian Watson has more, but I think it's Godwin.
All right, I would go with Godwin as well. We have some good news for you coming up here on Fantasy Football Today. We're going to tell you that after the break. Stay right with us here on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So I told you before the break, we got good news, and sure enough, out of Cincinnati, we do. Jamar Chase, Bengals wide receiver, is practicing. He's in uniform. He's good to go, at least that's the hope. And so, Heath, we finally have the answer that we've been waiting for. It sounds like he's going to play despite not getting the contract extension that he's been holding in for. So Jamar Chase, no official word, just in practice, in uniform. But assuming he plays this week against the Patriots, must start wide receiver, or are you going to be a little hesitant because he hasn't been practicing?
Like whether you're going to rank him at 2nd or 5th or 8th, you're going to start Jamar Chase. You can't sit Jamar Chase on your bench. If he is in the active lineup for the Bengals, and I was getting close to the point to where, like, if he wasn't at practice on Thursday, do you push him below Rashee Rice and start Rice over him, or start Zay Flowers over him because we don't know if he's going to play? Now you can hold out hope and just plan on starting him.
Robert, you talked about this a little bit earlier, that he hasn't been practicing, and that's a little bit of a concern. So are you worried at all about week 1 just because, again, he hasn't been ramped up doing all the things that he normally would do with the team?
Well, you hope he's in shape. The positive is they're playing the Patriots. Okay, that's the positive. And so because of that, and no disrespect to Christian Gonzalez and their defense, but it's a good game for him to get going, and for that reason, I would start him. Now, if they were kicking it off against an AFC North opponent, I'm not as sure as Heath in that situation.
I guess the only flip side to that is they don't need him to beat the Patriots. So will they use him in his normal allotment of snaps? But could be his preseason game. So if you have Jamar Chase, I think Heath said it best. You're probably starting him in the majority of your lineups. Why would you draft him in the first round otherwise? All right, let's do what we were going to do in this segment, which is a little game called Start, Bench, Cut. And what this is for week 1. So which of these players would you start on your team? Would you bench on your team? Or if you had to make a decision, cut on your team? Most of the time, you're probably not going to cut these guys. We'll start with the quarterbacks here. So we got Jared Goff, C.J. Stroud, and Anthony Richardson, as we have a Pete Prisco making faces at us behind the glass over there. So we got 3 quarterbacks here that are all in great spots for this week. Stroud and Richardson playing against each other. Jared Goff in a great matchup against the Rams. Who you starting, Heath? Who you benching? Who you cutting?
I really hate you for this because I guess...
I looked at your rankings.
Yes. Technically speaking, I would start Jared Goff over Anthony Richardson.
I would too.
He's a top 7 quarterback for me, but C.J. Stroud's going to be my start because he's number 6 at QB for me. And if I'm not starting Jared Goff, I'm definitely not cutting Anthony Richardson. So I'll bench Anthony Richardson. I will cut Jared Goff, even though I love Jared Goff, and he's a top 7 quarterback for me this week.
Robert, what about you? Start, bench, cut these 3 quarterbacks.
I'm going to start C.J. Stroud. I'm going to put Jared Goff on the bench, and I'm going to cut Anthony Richardson. I'm not as bullish on Anthony Richardson as most fantasy managers are. I know he's ranked high. He's got a lot of potential. I haven't seen it, so I'm a guy, I got to see it.
Right.
I know the numbers, are there. The potential is there. But Jared Goff, I know is going to give me numbers consistently because that's what he's been doing over the course of his career.
I will say for this week, Jared Goff is my favorite quarterback. I would end up probably cutting, just based on the rankings, C.J. Stroud, because Jared Goff is going to be the start of the week for week number 1. Let's go now to a running back trio. We got James Conner, Aaron Jones, and Tony Pollard. So you got start, bench, cut for James Conner, Aaron Jones, and Tony Pollard. Robert, I'll go to you first here. So who are we starting, who are we benching, and who are we cutting of Conner, Jones, and Pollard?
This is tough, but I'm going to start James Conner. I'm going to put Aaron Jones on the bench. And who was the third guy?
Tony Pollard.
Tony Pollard? He's cut. I got to cut Tony on this one. James Conner starting, Aaron Jones on the bench. I'm cutting Tony Pollard. I love James Conner. He produced. He produces early in the seasons pretty consistently. Aaron Jones, I think, is a very underrated back. Took him a little while to get going last season, but I still, I've got him ranked above Tony Pollard. Gotta love Tony Pollard, but didn't get quite the production that you thought you would get from him last season. I don't really see that changing. I think he might be a little bit better but I'm going to cut him in this situation.
We're going to be on the complete flip side here. So I will start Tony Pollard, I will bench James Conner, and I will cut Aaron Jones. I expect maybe a 55-45 split with Ty Chandler. I'm not sure Minnesota's going to be any good at running the ball. And I do have just a little bit of concern for James Conner this week, just because they're 6-point underdogs to Buffalo, and Conner wasn't hugely involved in the passing game last year. If they fall behind, it might be Amari DiMercado on the field more than we'd like to see.
That would be ugly. For this week only, I would start James Conner just because I agree with Robert. I think when he's healthy, when he's on the field, he's going to do a lot of special things. And in this case, yes, the Vikings are going to share time, but obviously the Titans are as well. For the matchup, I would rather have Aaron Jones, just in case. James Conner's a healthy scratch before the game starts. You throw Aaron Jones in there, taking on the Giants. Tony Pollard, a little bit of a tougher matchup against the Bears. All right, one more of these, and then we'll take a break here. Let's go to the wide receivers. And we got one young guy and two old guys, Jaylen Waddle, Davante Adams, and Cooper Kupp. So you got two guys 31 years old in Adams and Kupp, and Jaylen Waddle, the young guy, hopefully going to play a little bit better. So Heath, I'll start with you. Who you starting, who you mentioned, who you cutting? Waddle, Adams, Kupp.
Can I see Jaylen Waddle's injury designation for Wednesday?
He's good to go. He's good to go.
So I'm going to start Cooper Kupp this game against the Lions. That's basically the Coors Field of the NFL. Any game that's played there's a bunch of touchdowns, has the highest over-under on the slate. I will start Cooper Kupp. I am going to bench Jaylen Waddle. I am going to cut Davante Adams. And I'm a little bit worried about Adams with the quarterback play and the Raiders' offensive game plan.
All right, Robert, same thing. Start, bench, cut of these three wide receivers.
Now, I've got to agree 100%. I mean, honestly, it would be tough for me even to draft Davante Adams at all, on my roster as a fantasy manager because of the quarterback situation, in Las Vegas. You're just not going to get the consistency there. So I'm starting Cooper Kupp, benching Jaylen Waddle, and cutting Davante Adams.
We're in agreement on the guy to cut. I would actually start Waddle over Kupp just because I'm a little concerned about that Rams offensive line. Both those games are going to be track meets between the Dolphins, the Jaguars, and the Rams and the Lions. I just give Waddle a slight edge in that matchup against Jacksonville. I think it's going to be fun to see how that game unfolds. All right, one quick question here, and then we're going to answer a few questions after the break. So we got this one from Anthony, half PPR in the flex. Robert, just give me a name. Brian Robinson Jr. or Jerome Ford?
Brian Robinson Jr.
I would agree, but it's close between those two guys. All right, we're going to take a break right now. When we come back and answer more of your questions, thank you for sending them to us on Twitter, X, using the hashtag AskFFT. That's next after the break. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Thank you for sending us your questions using the hashtag AskFFT. Walter wants to know, needs a flex starter in full PPR. Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Zamir White. Who's your starter out of that group, Heath?
Who are your other starters is what I want to know, but I'm actually going with Cooper Kupp.
All right, I would go with Garrett Wilson. Robert, who are you going with?
Garrett Wilson as well.
All right, next question. John wants to know, half PPR, no IR spots. Would you trade Chase Brown for Jonathan Brooks if you have Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, Brian Robinson, and Jaleel McLaughlin? So would you trade Chase Brown for Jonathan Brooks, Robert, with no IR spot?
No, I would not.
100%. This is exactly where I'd want to do it because you're never going to start Chase Brown.
And Brooks, when he comes back, could be the lead running back there for the Panthers and hopefully a star. Need some serious damage control after a pretty good draft. Thoughts on a flex and super flex here. Pick two, Najee Harris, James Conner, Will Levis, Geno Smith, and Chuba Hubbard. So who's the flex, Heath?
It will be Conner.
Conner and Robert, who's the super flex?
I'm going with James Conner as well as the flex.
Okay, so Conner in the flex. I'll go with Geno Smith in the super flex. One more?
Okay. All
right, would you start Joe Burrow? Well, we know Jamar Chase looks like he's trending in. Or Kyler Murray, 6 points for passing touchdowns. Robert, which quarterback do you like better, Burrow or Kyler?
Oh, I'm going with Joe. That's a tough one, though.
Kyler.
With Chase there?
Kyler.
I would go Kyler also just because I think he's going to have to do a little bit more. Burrow could be done in the third quarter. Last one. All right, would you trade Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rachaad White for Jonathan Taylor, Jerome Ford, and Xavier Worthy in a 12-team PPR league where you have Jamar Chase and Najee at running back?
Yikes.
So would you make that trade, Robert? Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rachaad White for Taylor, Ford, and Worthy?
No, I would not. It's a tough one. I would think about it, but no, ultimately.
No, I like getting the best player, but you're overpaying to do that.
Yeah, and look, Marvin Harrison Jr. in PPR might be the best player over Jonathan Taylor, so we'll see how that unfolds. All right, great job as always. Thank you for sending us your questions. Again, keep them coming. We'll answer them throughout all of our programming here. We'll be back on this set on Friday, but you can check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast wherever podcasts are available. Great job, Robert Turbin. Great job, Heath Cummings. And great job, everybody. Good luck with your lineups starting Thursday night. Thank you for watching Fantasy Football Today.